Good evening. I'm Mike Marza as we take a look back at a big day in the trial for Sean Diddy Combs. The prosecution and the defense resting their cases today, and it took less than 30 minutes for Mr. Combs' defense to rest its case. No witnesses. Combs did not take the stand, and very little evidence presented to jurors. Combs telling the judge it was his choice alone to testify or not testify on his behalf, and he chose not to testify. In just a moment, we're going to be joined by ABC News legal contributor Bernarda Villalona to dig deeper into everything that unfolded today in court. But first up, Darla Miles with a recap from Lower Manhattan.
After 28 days of testimony about freak-offs, Wild King nights, and hotel nights, jurors seeing photos of baby oil, 7-inch heels, and a variety of drugs from the days-long sexual encounters with male escorts, federal prosecutors resting their case against Sean Diddy Combs Tuesday afternoon. Back in May, federal prosecutors set out to prove sex trafficking charges against Combs involving Cassie Ventura, an ex-girlfriend testifying under the name Jane, but a third alleged victim expected to testify, never taking the stand. This March 2016 video of Combs punching and kicking Ventura at an LA hotel played multiple times for the jury to try to show that Ventura felt threatened and coerced by Combs. And a security guard testifying that he took a $100,000 bribe to bury the surveillance video. A major part of the case against Combs involved his chief of staff and members of his security team, who prosecutors allege were part of a conspiracy and support account of racketeering. They didn't testify either. Christina Coram mentioned more than 175 times during the trial. Singer and musician Scott Mescudi testifying about a failed Molotov cocktail that burned his Porsche and believe Combs is responsible. Brianna Bongolan, a friend of Ventura, testifying Combs caused this injury to her knee by dangling her over a 17th floor balcony. Defense attorneys not calling one witness, instead delivering brutal and sometimes humiliating cross-examinations to point out inconsistencies, and also delivering what Judge Arun Subramanian once called a real Perry Mason moment. Sean Combs, for the first time, standing up to address the court when asked, "Do you understand that as a criminal defendant, you have the right to testify if you wish to testify?" Combs responding, "Yes, Your Honor." "Is it your decision not to testify in this case?" Combs saying, "That is solely my decision." Now, closing arguments are scheduled for Thursday. Both sides say it will take 4 hours.
All right, thanks to Darla Miles for that recap. Joined now, as always, by ABC News legal contributor Bernarda Villalona. Bernarda, great to see you.
Great to see you, Mike.
All right, so we're approaching the end of this whole thing,
yes,
which is kind of hard to believe when you think back to, 6 weeks ago when this all kicked off. Let's pick up right where Darla left us here, because how all this is going to play out moving forward. Closing arguments, so important. 4 hours each side, but we think this is going to be stretched over 2 days?
Yes, so let's start off. So Wednesday, which is tomorrow, the jury is not going to come to the courthouse. Instead, that time is going to be spent on going over to what the jury instructions are going to be with the attorneys and the judge. So they're going to come in on Thursday, the jury. They're supposed to come in by 8:45 and hoping to start at 9 o'clock with an end time of 5 o'clock. So in terms of how closing arguments happens, the prosecution is going to give an initial closing argument, and then the defense is going to give their closing argument. They expect their closing argument to last about 4 hours. The judge said that he'll probably give breaks every 2 hours, to give a break to the jury and then probably take a short lunch break, which he provides lunch for the jurors so they don't have to exit the courthouse, and also to speed things up. After that, the prosecution is supposed to come back on rebuttal with their main closing argument, where they're really going to take their time out to rebut what the defense said and also bring out some more evidence that they did it initially. And they expect that to probably trickle into Friday. So while they will get started on Thursday, they're not going to finish until Friday. Depending on what time they finish on Friday, the judge is going to give the jury instructions to this jury. And again, that can last a few hours. I assume it's going to last at least 2 hours or so, those jury instructions, because the instructions are very lengthy. Now, after that, the judge will have the decision to make as to whether he's going to let the jury begin deliberations on Friday. I think it's going to depend on what time they finish on Friday, because what the judge doesn't want to happen, that the jury starts deliberating on Friday, something happens over the weekend, and one of those sitting 12 jurors can no longer sit on the trial, And guess what happens if the defense is not willing to substitute that juror, because now the defense will have to consent to it and it's not in the prerogative and the discretion of the judge anymore. If the defense says, no, I'm not going to substitute that juror, then it's an automatic mistrial. Wow. So what the judge will likely do is that if it ends, say he finishes jury instructions around 2 or 3 o'clock, he may say, jury, I'm going to allow you to start fresh on Monday morning, and that way on Monday morning the judge can say, now you have the case so you can deliberate the sitting 12 jurors, and likely the defense is going to say to dismiss the alternate jurors, so there will no longer be alternate jurors, and everything's going to be in the hand of those sitting 12 jurors. And after that, Mike, who knows what's going to happen or how long it's going to take for this jury to reach a decision, if they can reach a decision as to any of the 5 counts.
That's an important point, too, because it could be a hung jury. It could. So we'll see how it shakes out. So interesting. So it sounds like likely the deliberations will probably not begin until next week.
Yes, it's quite possible.
Which leads into the 4th of July.
And just remember, they're not working. The courthouse is closed July 3rd and July 4th. So it's really Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday for deliberations. We're all hoping, remember when the judge instructed this jury and the judge stated to these jurors that the case will likely be done before the 4th of July. So you don't want to run into a problem where if they don't have a verdict by Wednesday and all of a sudden one of the jurors says, well, I had plans and you said that it wasn't going to go past this date. So the hope is from everyone, especially with so many vacations coming up, that the jury has a decision by Wednesday.
So the last items that the jury heard before the closing were what? What did the defense, because, you know, a lot of people said, oh, the defense didn't even really put on a case. They introduced some text messages in the evidence. They didn't call a witness. What did the defense do today?
So
I guess the prosecution rested this morning, though, right?
Yes. So the prosecution rested. Well, we went into like the 1 o'clock hour, almost 2 o'clock hour before the prosecution actually rested their case. So in terms of what happened, the prosecution still had that summary witness, that special agent who testified, and the defense went through several hours and hours of putting in additional text messages, or actually highlighting text messages for this jury. But remember, the reason that they're doing it, though, is because they weren't going to call their summary witness on their case. So instead, they decided to bring out these messages or these documents or these invoices that they wanted to highlight through the prosecution's own case. So eventually, cross-examination ended. The prosecutor was able to redirect that special agent and actually kind of drop a bomb on the defense in the sense of, because the defense ended their cross-examination talking about and highlighting that Sean Combs paid for some of these expenses or reimbursed the company out of his own money. But if you read it that way, then what it means is that you pay for this transportation to engage in prostitution. So it's like, wait, why would you ask that as a defense attorney? So the prosecution was able to capitalize on those last couple of statements, even though the objection was sustained, but the message was already put forth in front of that jury. After redirect, the prosecution rested. And the judge.
What was that moment like, though? Because
because right away, because I knew the prosecution was going to say that they rest their case. So right away, I'm looking at the jury just to see what their facial reactions were going to be. And it's like, okay, they rested. So after that, the judge took a break and they did what's called a Rule 29 hearing, in a sense of that the defense was requesting for a motion for an acquittal, meaning that the prosecution hasn't made out any of the 5 counts. And because they haven't made out the 5 counts, that the judge should dismiss those counts and those counts shouldn't go before the jury to deliberate. You got to think, if you get any of those counts dismissed by the judge, it's a win right there. But what the judge said is that despite the arguments that were made and despite that the prosecution said, look, we rest on the record, that he is going to reserve his decision for after the jury returns a verdict, because if the jury returns a verdict, either way, it's like, okay, you saved my job, you know, from making a decision on that. After a break, we return to the courtroom and the defense starts reading, well, even before we go there, the judge asked Sean Combs, allocated Sean Combs to ask him, do you wish to testify on your own defense?
Now he says like a Perry Mason moment. Like what basically it was dramatic, right? So
it was dramatic, and the reason why it was dramatic because remember, at no point during the trial you don't get to hear Sean Combs speak. He's not addressing
just the
judge.
Not in person. Yeah.
So this is the first time that you get to hear him speak, and this is not in front of the jury. The jury is in their room. They're eating their lunch. This is out of the presence of the jury. And the judge asks Sean Combs, do you understand that you have the right to testify in your own defense, that it is your decision and your decision alone as to whether you want to testify? Has asked him, have you taken any narcotics or alcohol within the last 48 hours? Are you waiving this right knowingly and intelligently, like you understand that you're waiving this right? And even before he answered that, Sean Combs took it upon himself to thank the judge for how he's presided over this case. And then he went to answer the questions that this is my choice and I solely waive this right. I do not wish to testify. I have spoken to my attorneys and am making this decision out of my own free will.
How did he sound?
Very confident, very confident. It wasn't like his voice was cracking at all, very loud. He projected. He's standing up before the judge. He didn't even need a microphone.
How tall is he?
So I'm 5'8".
Okay.
I would say maybe he's like 5'9" or 5'10".
Okay.
He's not that tall.
Okay, but he was projecting.
He was projecting, yeah. He was projecting, speaking loud, speaking confident, like he's confident in his case.
Okay.
So after that's done, then we take a break. And now before the jury, now the defense is asked whether they will be putting any evidence into their case in chief, and in the sense of what evidence that they put forward. Instead, what they did is that they read out a stipulation. So what's a stipulation? An agreement between the prosecution and the defense that if a certain witness were to be called, they would testify as to this, or stipulation as to a certain fact. So a few of them had to deal with the inconsistencies of several of the witnesses. So, for example, of Mia, that Mia had met with the prosecution on numerous occasions and at the very beginning never mentioned that Sean Combs had sexually assaulted her, at least for the first 3 times that she met with the prosecution. Also having to deal with Capricorn Clark, that when she met with the prosecution, she didn't make mention of a call, of calling Lauren London at the time when they were at Kid Cudi's house. Another thing with the escort who had testified that he had stated he had a crush on Cassie Ventura. So small little things to be able to argue during closing arguments as to the credibility of these witnesses. Like, look at these inconsistencies. When they met with law enforcement, this is what they said, which is contrary to what they stated on the stand. And then after that, looked at the jury and says, the defense rests.
When they're reading all these text messages, what is the jury? Because a lot of this they've heard, at least themes of it. But
Mike, this was dragging.
Is dragging on?
It was dragging for hours.
Okay.
Mike, it was dragging for hours.
Too long? Do you think that was a miscalculation?
It was for hours.
Yeah, it's a long
hours.
time.
I'm not talking about minutes. I'm talking about hours just sitting there. And it's like reading text messages, showing invoices. Okay, let me start my morning by watching some porn, because they started watching some freak-off videos first thing this morning, like, you know, here's your morning breakfast.
For the summary witness.
Yeah, first thing this morning was like, well, let's just start off by watching some videos this morning. And they watched several videos throughout the cross-examination yesterday as well as today.
Yeah.
So again, the defense wants to highlight their theme that the sex that was engaged in by Jane was all consensual. Also by explicit text messages where she's expressing her love and her enthusiasm to engage in these hotel nights, these sexual acts.
And messages that included the emojis.
Yeah, poor eggplant emoji. Yeah, there was a lot of that. There was a lot of water emojis, like all types of emojis. And Teddy Garagos, as she's questioning the special agent, like she's saying, like there's an eggplant emoji, there's this type of emoji, there's a heart emoji, there's a sweating emoji, there's a little devil emoji. Like you heard of all these emojis.
Right.
That's on the record.
The defense is trying to show that this was a consensual
relationship. But remember that when you're dealing with Jane in this specific case, it's difficult to really analyze her, because while on the stand she's saying now that no, she didn't want to engage in these sexual acts, that she just wanted to please her lover, and this is what her lover wanted, and if she didn't do it, she didn't want to upset him. Then the question is, but yeah, that's what was going on in your mind, but what were you expressing to Sean Combs? And that's why I think the prosecution is going to have a huge hurdle to overcome when it comes to Jane, as opposed to Cassie, because you know Cassie was getting beaten on a regular basis. And that infamous Intercontinental video, that while people say this is a domestic violence case, let's take it a step back, because what we learned through trial testimony is that there was an escort inside of that hotel room, and that she was engaging in one of these freak-offs, and that she left after she was struck, and Sean Combs wanted her to engage in that freak-off, and that's why he was dragging her back.
Well, let's fast forward to the point of deliberations, and it's going to be a question I'm probably going to ask a couple different times here, but as the jurors get in that room,
Woo!
and the door closes, theoretically, for the first time, this is the time where they're supposed to talk.
This is the first time when all 12 can stop talking about the weather and how hot it is outside, and instead talk about, okay, let's talk about the evidence. What do you think about Cassie? What do you think about Jay?
So much evidence. So what do they do first?
So the first thing that's going to happen is that they have to elect a foreperson. Who's going to be the foreperson out of those 12 jurors? And remember the makeup of the jury right now, it's 8 males and 4 females. So who will they elect to be the foreperson? Remember, the foreperson doesn't have more power, more decision making than the other jurors. The foreperson is the person that may lead the discussion, and if there are any jury notes, the foreperson has to sign the jury note and give it to the court officer. And also that when a verdict is announced, it will be that foreperson that will be announcing the verdict for this jury. But really, in terms of what happens, it depends on the prosecution. How do you lay it out and give directions to this jury? So when I was a prosecutor for 16 years. 10 of those years was just like homicide cases. And I would start off by telling this jury, this is what you're going to do. This is what you were selected. Like, you should be deciding this 1, 2, 3. These are the issues that you need to decide. Take out all the outside noise. You were selected for this specific reason. Now, when you go inside of the jury deliberation room, this is how you should approach this case. So if they want to do racketeering conspiracy, decide, was there an enterprise? Who was part of that enterprise? Okay, now that you got that, let's deal with the predicate acts. Let's leave the sex trafficking and transportation to engage in prostitution. Let's put that aside for now. And let's deal with the predicate acts that don't have to deal with Cassie and Jane, because you have to agree just on 2 predicate acts. And you can do that without even evaluating Cassie and Jane. Or they can say, let's go straight into transportation to engage in prostitution. All right, so here are the receipts, here are the invoices, here are the text messages, here are the photos, here are the escorts, and all you need is just one that you bought across straight lines in order to meet the transportation to engage in prostitution. 1 count for Cassie, 1 count for Jane.
As they're talking about all this, they have to send a note to get the evidence into the room, though, right? They don't go in there with any pieces of evidence. So it
depends. It depends what the judge wants to do. So some judges say, if the jury asks for the evidence, do I have the consent of the parties just to send all the evidence back there? With the exception of the firearms. The firearms will never be left inside of the deliberating room. A court officer will have to come in there and display the firearm. But I highly doubt they're going to ask about that firearm. But in terms of everything else, it depends on whether the judge is just going to straight out from the beginning just give them all the evidence and give them the transcript, because the transcript is going to tell us a lot. Because usually when it comes to jury deliberations for a trial that has lasted multiple weeks, jurors want to hear the testimony again, or certain parts of the testimony. So these jurors were allowed to take notes throughout the trial. So they have their juror notebooks, so they have the notes that they have taken, but not everybody remembers things the same way or takes notes the same way. So what's going to command is the transcript itself, because the transcript is what is accurate. So many questions. It all depends how the judge wants to run his courtroom, whether he sends the evidence back, does he send the transcript back, does he send the jury instructions back? Because that's another issue. Do you want the judge to read it, or are you just going to give them the entire stack of what you read to them and let them figure it out?
Right, and when you're talking about 2 hours, that's a lot to go through.
It's a lot. It's a lot to go through. Personally, as an observer, just because I want to be nosy, I'm like, Judge, don't send anything back, because I just want to know what the notes are, so I can try to figure out, read the tea leaves of what's going on inside in the deliberating room.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. And finally, for this conversation tonight, how will we sort of, and I know you never really know, but when we're watching this play out, Length of time, does that matter? What they're asking for, does that matter?
Oh, absolutely.
So how can we read what's going on without being in the room?
It's through the jury notes.
Yeah.
Through the jury notes. And just remember, with the jury notes, the judge is going to tell him, unlike the Karen Reed trial, that please do not put what the vote is or which side you're leaning to in terms of a verdict. Just ask the question without putting the actual vote on it. So if someone asks, what's the definition of reasonable doubt, right? Usually that's the sign. Or can we use sex transportation to engage in prostitution as one of the predicate acts for the racketeering conspiracy? Like, all of that gives you some kind of insight. Or if they ask, can I read the direct examination of Cassie, not the cross-examination, right? It's like, oh, you just want the direct. Goes to the prosecution, right? Exactly. Yeah. Or if they just want the cross-examination, it was like, well, someone's looking at something for the defense. You never know how many people in that jury room is thinking the same way. It could be one person. It could be 3, 4, 5. It can be all of them.
Yeah. And this is such a huge decision.
Absolutely.
One of the biggest decisions these 12 people will ever make. Exactly.
And that is something that the judge as well as the parties emphasize doing jury selection. Like, are you up to the task? Like, I want you to be honest as to, are you able to reach a decision of this magnitude? Yeah. Because it's one of the most important decisions, aside from having to deal with family or
right.
Important decisions about a health matter.
Well, we'll see how it all shakes out. Your perspective is always valuable. We appreciate you taking us inside the courtroom, and so stay with Eyewitness News and ABC7NY for all the updates. As Bernarda mentioned, the jury instruction conference is tomorrow, then the closing arguments, followed by the much-anticipated deliberations in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs. We also have a real-time blog with all the updates coming out of court.